you guys are going to want to stick around for today's show, especially because our next segment, we're checking in with celebrity historian Rafi Andonian. Stick around. Good morning and welcome back to North Dakota Today. Well, if you feel like your bank account is a little light after the holiday spending spree, then you may not be surprised to learn that January is Poverty Awareness Month. Here to talk about how poverty and charity has changed across generations of Americans is the richly informed celebrity historian Rafi Andonian. Good morning, Rafi.
Hey, here I am, and I brought with me my master's degree in nonprofit development, nonprofit management, which shows you my chops for working with charity.
Well, we know you are plenty qualified already, but let's take a trip back in time. Tell me how colonial Americans handled poverty.
They look back to the English model. So let's go back to the English. In 1601, about 400 years ago, they passed this kind of landmark, law, of course, with the approval of the Queen. And it would be in place for 250 plus years. And what this law did is it said that there is a legal right for the poor to get some sort of assistance. And it established sort of this public obligation, if you will. Now, this is not kind of bad, like what we have today. We're looking entirely different. The way it's going to look is you're going to have local churches that are implementing it. Think about it. You don't have the large kind of governments that you have today for government work. You don't have assistance is going to people's homes. So what's going to happen is it's going to be locally implemented, publicly funded. These churches are going to oversee them. Remember, church and state are intertwined at the time in England, it still is. And what they do is they make sure that you enroll in this program if you're impoverished and unemployed. Because if you remained unemployed, there was a big punishment, such as stoning you, such as imprisoning you. So even a death penalty was possible if you did not comply with this. So there was kind of a cost for the aid, if you will, if that makes any sense. Now, what you also had to do was avoid begging, because that was also outlawed as a result of this. Hey, you got these resources, now you can't be begging in the street. So the colonials copied this model when they had their colonies and then later their early states by having localized laws. They wouldn't have the state. Now, of course, they don't have the king or the queen. They had the states or the colonies at first, and the states passed these local laws. They would be implemented by various local authorities, and they would have to decipher between the worthy and the non-worthy poor. And that really matters because, it's kind of like this iteration of the previous idea of, hey, man, if you're going to get aid, then, you have to show up, right? And if you did not, then they classified you in this sort of unworthy category, which means that you might lose your aid. Now, what did aid look like in a more agrarian society here in America? What happened is you would get basically hired for your cost of your housing and your food, etc., by a farm that needed the assistance. So so publicly funded, locally implemented, they'd match you up. So you had to work. And then what would happen is the money would go to the farmer to cover your, sustaining you. And so that's how that program worked. And so as a result of that, what happens is you may imagine someone might go town to town or state to state. So there were these things in place to prevent transiency. So you don't just keep going from place to place and continue to get aid. And so ultimately what happens is this evolves, because that's in the 18th century, early 19th century. By the time you get kind of the rise of cities in the middle part of the 19th century, you get these poorhouses as they're known. Now this says, hey, instead of being kind of diffuse all over the place because it's hard to track, we're going to have everyone in one concentrated area. And this helps us put in a daily regimen. It helps us make sure that they're working all the time because there's always work to be done because they're all here together. And eventually those would phase out as well. But these are just a couple of the iterations of how early poverty was handled.
Wow. Okay, so very different than what we see today. Now, on the flip side, how has philanthropy shaped America?
Well, in those poorhouses that I mentioned, they evolved eventually to something known as, for example, the Hull House, Jane Addams' Hull House, which was a settlement house, a more comprehensive house, which it had for educational services and, other kind of broader services, social services for them. But the big thing that really changed philanthropy was something known as social Darwinism. What social Darwinism was the idea that there'd be the survival of the fittest. in society. And so what that means is that you have to distinguish again between the deserving and the undeserving poor. And as a result, you have to figure out who can get this kind of aid. Who's qualified most to do that? The rich folks, according to this philosophy, in the late 19th and early 20th century. Someone like Andrew Carnegie believed this because he said, look, if we made this money, Andrew Carnegie was an immigrant who made it big. So if I made this money in this concentration of capital, that means that I'm qualified in there I am with Andrew Carnegie there on the right side.
I can tell the difference, yeah.
But if I made this money, then I'm also going to be able to understand where it makes sense to be spent because I made the capital. Now I've proven that I have this sort of fitness, if you will. He didn't want to give money to people that were undeserving because he thought it actually hurt them more and he thought it was wasteful. But he thought if you give the people that are deserving, that are down on their luck, the resources they need, because they're fit, survival of the fittest, they will run with that and grow themselves. That was kind of the idea here behind that. So he came up with something called the gospel of wealth. The gospel of wealth is the philosophy that the rich have an obligation, he thought, to go ahead and give almost all their money while they were living. He didn't want you to die with it. He supported a large estate tax because he thought you don't want to die and then have all that money go to the state and be given away all kinds of ways. It's your obligation, and it shouldn't go to your kids because it's just going to spoil them. So during life, you should be giving your money away, and that's known as the gospel of wealth by Andrew Carnegie.
Wow. Okay. That is a heck of a theory.
It is. Now, let me tell you real quick. One of the big things that Carnegie does is he creates he funds libraries, thousands across the country. And the library is a classic example of that because what that does is it gives you the tools to help yourself. That was the idea behind behind the library. And that's why he supported it. He was a fan of learning and improving yourself. And one of them was right here in Fargo in 1903.
Get out.
Established a Carnegie Library, $20,000 grant, which today would be about $750,000. It wasn't the only one. North Dakota State University got one, and Fargo College also got one. And eventually it'll be 11 across North Dakota. So North Dakota, and specifically here in Fargo, was very much affected by this philosophy of the gospel of wealth, and Andrew Carnegie himself putting libraries in communities across the country. That's the impact that he had.
Well, how cool is it that we have a bit of his history right here locally?
Right.
Thank you so much, Rafi, for breaking all this down for us this morning.
Thank you all.
Absolutely. We'll see you next time. But you guys at home, don't go away quite yet.